Hi guys, in this episode of Shri series, we'll talk about algebra, but to be more specific, how do we simplify algebraic fractions? Now we've got two questions here, 1 and 2, but before we proceed any further, I'd like us to use this section here to do a bit of a prep work on how we could simply get in fractions and get them into its lowest common terms. Obviously, it's a term that you've used in previous year groups like year 7, year 8, but how do we apply it in this context? All right. Now, suppose you've got a simple fraction like 3/6, and the question asks you, how do you simplify it to its lowest terms? In other words, what number is common between the numerator, that is 3, and the denominator, that is 6, such that it can easily be divisible without leaving a remainder. All right, so what comes in my mind is 3, because 3 can be divided by 3 and 6 can be easily divided by 3. So what I would do is I would say divided by 3, and that becomes 1/2, because 3 divided by 3 is 1 and 6 divided by 3 is 2. All right. So in this one here, you've easily simplified it where the numerator is 1. However, there are certain examples where you're going to simplify it where your numerator won't be 1. So here's another example here, 12/15. Now we want to simplify this fraction in its lowest term. So what number can be easily divisible by 12 and 15 without having to leave a remainder? Now what comes in my mind is the number 3. So just like above here, so what I would do is I would divide 12 by 3 and 15 by 3. So if you look at it, 12 divided by 3 is 4 and 15 divided by 3 is 5. Now when you're solving questions like this, you don't have to include what you're dividing it by, because you already know, it's assumed that you know you're dividing it by it. But for beginners, it's important that we go through that. All right. So likewise, we're going to be using this concept and principle to solve questions 1 and 2. All right. However, this is not exactly like that, because these two questions, 1 and 2, had pure numbers. It had just numbers. Whereas in this one here, you've got numbers and letters. All right. So there is a way and technique in solving this. So let's look at question number 1, where it's 8a squared b divided by 2a. Now we know very well that, no, hang on, there is 8 and 2, there's a number, you can easily divide them. There's an a above, a squared above, and a below. However, what I like to do is to simplify this further. I like to write it down like this. So I like a, and because a squared, that basically means you've got two a's. All right. If you remember the previous videos that I mentioned, when you had something like a squared, that's the same as a times a. A cubed means a times a times a. All right. So that's a way of expanding it. You're expanding what's as a square in this case, or expanding what's as a cube in this case. All right. So therefore, when you got 8a squared b, that a squared, I could make that as a times b. All right. So what I've done is I've expanded the numerator. I've made 8a squared b as 8 times a times b divided by 2 times a. I found out that this technique helps visualize students to see, all right, what numbers can I cancel because they're common above. Now, the next trick I tell students is deal with the numbers first. Deal with the numbers in the sense you simplify them and then later deal with the like terms. So if you look at this question here, you've got 8a, and b, and you've got 2 and a. So the first thing I'm going to do is let me simplify the numbers, which is 8 and 2. And if you divide 8 divided by 2, that's going to be 4. All right. So like I said in the previous videos, it's very important that you're very familiar with your times table as well as your division, because they come hand in hand, particularly in questions like this. All right. So I've simplified the numbers. So I've gone 2 and then I've got 4 there. All right. And then I've got a times a divided by a. So if I notice one thing, there's an a there and there's an a there, I'll cancel it out because it's the same. So what I'll do is I'll cancel that a and I'll cancel that a. What remains is that a. All right. So you can see that I've got my like terms a above and another a below. All right, so that's what makes it very, very simplifiable. All right, the next one here is I've now put my a there, and then I see that there's b above, in other words the numerator, but there's no b below. So in this situation, what I would do is I'll see, hang on, there's nothing below that I could cancel with b, so the answer becomes 4ab. All right, so if you see what I've done, the first thing is I expand it for students to understand. Obviously, once you become an expert in this, you don't even need to go through this step. However, I'm one person who emphasizes that it's very, very important that you show each and every step. As we do more complex questions in the next couple of sessions, you'll actually see that we need to simplify each and every step to ensure that we get full marks. All right, so we got 8 divided by 2, that was 4. The double a and a, that cancels out, and b is simplified. All right, so that becomes 4ab, and that's my answer here. All right, now let's look at question number 2. All right, we've got 3 minus 9x divided by 3. All right, you will notice that when you're doing simple questions like this, you will need an extra step, and that extra step requires required knowledge or prior knowledge. So if you look at this step here, before we even go any further and decide to divide like that, we need to factorize this one here. Now, in the previous video, I'd explained what factorization is. When you're factorizing two things, you need to find out what number or expression is common, and then you open and close your brackets. So if you look at this question, 3 minus 9x, you can't simply divide straight away. What I encourage students to do is, the first thing is you need to simplify it. So 3 minus 9x, when you simplify, that's going to be 3, because 3 is common between 3 and minus 9x. Open the brackets. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. And you put a minus because you got a minus there. And 9x divided by 3, that's going to be 3x. And then what you do, you divide it by 3 there. So what I've simply done is I've factorized this expression, and I've kept the denominator the way it is. And like I said before, if you're not too sure whether you've got the answer right, just simply do the opposite, which is expansion. So 3 times 1 becomes 3, and 3 times negative 3x becomes negative 9x. All right, so now you've done this. The next step is we're going to do something similar to this step here, where we're now going to divide. Now I can see literally that 3 and 3 can be divided, and that will now become 1. So 3 divided by 3, that now becomes 1, and what remains is 1 minus 3x. So what I would do right now is I would write the answer 1 minus 3x. It's now simplified. All right, so the difference between question 1 and question 2 is, in question number 2, we had to do one extra step, which required you to factorize. So please bear in mind that if you didn't know how to factorize, chances are that you wouldn't get this question right. One of the tricky points in mathematics, or should I say one of the tricky steps in mathematics, is you need to understand certain topics in order for you to answer a respective question. So for example, in this question, 3 minus 9x divided by 3, you couldn't literally divide straight away because you needed to simply factorize and then simplify. All right, now if you didn't know how to factorize, then you would not get the answer correct. So that's how you simplify this question. So in mathematics, particularly in algebra, simplifying means making something complex, oopsie, and then dividing it by using common factors or common terms to its simplest term. So if you simplify that to this, so you can see 8a squared b divided by 2a, that became simplified to this. So you can see between that and that, from the origin to the destination, you actually realize that this is more simplified. All right, you look at this question here, 3 minus 9x divided by 3. That's the original expression. We've now simplified it to 1 minus 3x. So you can see what was complex, we've now made it simple. In the next couple of sessions, we'll see more tricky questions. How do we can further simplify that? All right, that's there for now. Thank you. Bye.